Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Library Journal Day of Dialogue. My name is Lynn Lovash. I'm a librarian at the New York Public Library, and I'll be moderating this session, Literary Stars. But before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This is a pre-recorded session, and it will be available within the virtual environment for 3 months. There's no live Q&A, sorry, but please feel free to leave your comments on Twitter with the hashtag LJDOD. And now let me introduce our panel for today. Elizabeth Strout is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of All of Again, Anything is Possible, My Name is Lucy Barton, The Burgess Boys, Olive Kittredge, for which she most deservedly won the Pulitzer Prize, Abide with Me, and Amy and Isabel. Her newest novel, Oh, William, will be published by Random House on November 19th. I'm not sure if that's how you like it pronounced, Elizabeth, but there's an exclamation point after
Yeah.
Okay. Gary Steingart is the New York Times bestselling author of the memoir Little Failure and the novels Super Sad, True Love Story, Absurdistan, and The Russian Debutante's Handbook. His new novel, Our Country Friends, will be published by Random House on November 2nd. Ruth Ozeki is a novelist, filmmaker, and Zen Buddhist priest. She is the award-winning author of 3 novels, My Year of Meats, All Over Creation, and A Tale for the Time Being. Her nonfiction work includes a memoir, The Face, A Time Code, and the documentary Having the Bones. Her newest novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness, will be published by Viking on September 21st. And Atticus Lish is the author of the PEN/Faulkner winning debut novel, Preparations for the Next Life. His new novel, The War for Gloria, will be published by Knopf on September 7th. Thank you all very much for being here with us today. Librarians are very excited to hear about your latest works. And in that vein, I'd like to start off today by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about what readers can expect with your new book. Atticus, may we start with you?
Yes, ma'am. My book is about a young lad who wants to go on a great adventure. And he's close to his mother. His mother's name is Gloria. She's a single mom. So he's growing up with her. And when he's 15, his mother gets diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's. And that's the beginning of the adventure, you might say. Now, his father shows up in the picture. His father's not married to his mother. They're estranged. His father shows up, and his name's Leonard. And so what starts happening is there's a war between the son and the father about how to treat mom. And a lot of other people get drawn into that war. And the real question is, who's going to make it? Will the son make it? And the book answers that question.
Great, thanks. Ruth, what about you?
Sure. Well, let's see. The Book of Form and Emptiness is also a story about a young teenage boy whose name is Benny O. And Benny starts to hear voices after his father dies. So the first voice he hears is the voice of his father calling out to him. But then sort of little by little, he starts to hear other voices as well. And the voices belong to, the things around him in the house, like his sneaker or, a pair of scissors or a piece of wilted lettuce. And he doesn't really understand what the things are saying to him, but he kind of, he gets a feeling tone from it. And this is very disturbing to him. What makes it worse is that his mother, Annabelle, has been forced to work from home, like all of us, and she's become a bit of a hoarder. And so the house is really chaotic and filled with things that just can't and won't shut up. So Benny starts getting in trouble at school, and then eventually he does what any sensible boy would do. He finds refuge at the public library. Of course, at the public library, books are orderly, right? They speak in their quiet library voices. They know how to whisper. And so this is, the library is where he finds relief from all of the chaos of capitalism and the outside world. And of course, this is a very special library with special people in it. He meets all sorts of people, including a homeless Slovenian poet philosopher who holds literary salons in the library washroom. He falls in love with a young performance artist who makes these elaborate installations through the library's collections. And he also meets a children's librarian. And well, I won't tell you what the children's librarian does, but you'll have to read the book. But she's, she's a librarian, right? She's a superhero. And I guess the last thing I should say about the book is that it's the narrator of the book is the book itself, right? Books are speaking objects. And so this book, the Book of Form and Emptiness, in dialogue with the protagonist, with Benny, is literally speaking itself into being. So that's it.
Wow. Elizabeth, how about you?
Well, Oh, William came to me, it arrived, the whole thing sort of arrived when Laura Linney, who was rehearsing for, she did a one-woman show of My Name is Lucy Barton, both in London and on Broadway. And I was at a rehearsal with her one day, and the director said something about William, who was the first husband of Lucy in the book. And she just put her glasses on top of her head and made some remark, which I can't remember, but I'll never forget. I just thought, oh, William. So then I realized that, okay, let's look at William. And William has his story. He was the son of a POW from Germany who was brought over to Holton, Maine, which was true, to help with the potato farmers back then during World War II. And he married the potato farmer's wife. So we know that much. So then I pictured William, and I pictured his hair, white and sort of standing out with his big white mustache. And so he was very vivid to me. And then I realized, okay, so through circumstances, which I won't go into, he and Lucy end up taking a car trip to Holton, Maine to find out more about his POW father and his mother. And that's really what the whole book revolves around. And there was a man, my husband and I made this trip ourselves, and there was a man that I saw at the airport whose khakis were a little too short, and I thought, oh, William will have khakis that are just a little too short. So anyway, so that's the story. But the main book is really about a couple who has, they've broken up for many years, and yet they have maintained some kind of relationship. And then you throw them in this car together and take them up to Maine. And it was just interesting to see, because there's different, Lucy is the only person that knew William's mother at this point. So he's feeling connected to her because of that, being an only child, he's connected with Lucy over that. And because they have these two daughters. So that's really what goes on. And the Oh, William is can be expressed in many, many different ways throughout the book. So thank you.
Love that. Good story. Gary, you're up. Tell us about your
So in March of last year, I found myself living up in my place in upstate New York with my family, and living next to some of my very dear friends with whom we've kind of formed this rural pod, if you will. And I was writing a dystopian novel at the time, as I want to do, but the dystopia that was starting to happen in America in real time far exceeded the horrors I was writing about. So I changed course and began to write about life in a country house, in which a writer invites some of his oldest friends and one of his newest enemies to live with him through the pandemic. So think of it as a kind of Big Chill meets the Decameron, but told in a very gentle Chekhovian rhythm. So just to give you an idea of who these people are, there's a Russian-American writer who owns the house with his Russian wife. My wife's not Russian, who's a psychiatrist. She's also not a psychiatrist. They have a precocious adopted daughter. There's a world-famous actor. There's a Korean-American designer of a crazy app that makes people fall in love with one another. There's a Southern woman who writes incendiary essays that get her into a lot of trouble on social media. There's a Gujarati American adjunct professor / short order cook. And there's the scion of a Korean conglomerate. So you really do have a kind of zoo of characters there. And all these people, of course, as they must, fall in love with one another in a more, Tolstoyan than Chekhovian way. Sonia loves Vanya, Vanya loves, etc. Nobody's it's all a mishmash. So it's about love and friendship and betrayal and family, which I think really are the only topics worth writing about anyway. I mean, who cares about anything else? And of course, there's the pandemic and there's a country falling apart, but those things are in the background. And the country friends think they're completely safe from everything that's happening down in the big city 100 miles to the south, but then they're not. I should add, I also think despite despite the subject matter, that there's that it's also a kind of funny book. I like funny, but hopefully also captures the sadness of our times. And the last thing I want to say is that most of my books before this have been set on several continents, but the pandemic forced me to sort of focus on just one locale, the house in the country. And that made me, I think, delve deeper into the hearts and minds of these 8 characters than I've ever delved before. So that's my book.
Wow, that's interesting. A different direction for you, a bit of a stretch. I'm going to use the phrase zoo of characters wherever applicable now in describing books. I think that's great.
Good.
Okay, so now I have individual questions for you. I'm going to start with Elizabeth. Because you're speaking to a bunch of librarians and librarians love research, I was wondering, did you do any research for your book, or was it really just this road trip with your husband?
No, I did a great deal of research because I was very, very interested in the POWs that actually came from Germany, and they did work in Holton. And they were in these barracks. We saw the remaining parts of the barracks. We went and to the library. I researched their whole situation as much as I could find out, which was not a small amount. So I did a lot of research about who his father actually was, and in real life. I mean, not real life, but you know what I mean. In my fictional life and real life in Holton, Maine. So yes, and then and all the details in that book, because this is northern Maine and it's very different from what most people think of as Maine. Mm-hmm. And there was this one road called the Haynesville Road, which a song has been written called Tombstone Every Mile. It's just the most depressing road. It was a logger's road, a trucking road for years and years. And so it was very interesting. We went right down that road, up that road and back down it. And every single thing I saw, I was taking notes on, because it's its own kind of world up there.
Wow, that's interesting. I wondered what your playlist was on that road trip.
Oh, just talking. Just talking, looking at the different kinds of clover, noticing when there were birch trees and when there weren't birch trees.
What kind of music do you listen to when you're?
Yeah, I was just like, wow, there's just a lot of stuff up there that I would not have thought of otherwise.
That's really great. Thank you for telling us about that. Gary, so what was it like writing about the pandemic in real time? I was thinking about, it must have been sort of fun to have this alternate lockdown to escape to. So you were, you could go to the country house and escape from your actual lockdown wherever you were. I think you said you were upstate.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, it was sort of the key to my own mental survival, was the fact that, as I said, I have some friends who live nearby, but I began to add all these people. I made an actor up from all the actors I've known over the years. I made him even more awful than some of the actors I know. I did all these different, I had a lot of cooking in the book, so I remembered all the guests I've had in previous summers who had come and cooked these amazing meals, and then I started hounding them for these recipes. So if you want to know how to make a really good vitello tonato, that's in the book too. I started thinking about, just conversations and seeing these sort of phantom conversations around the dinner table and what they would look like. And for some of these characters, I thought, what would the romance look like between, say, person A and person G? It's like trying to mate a giraffe and an aardvark because they're so dissimilar. But I thought, I got to work through every permutation here, and that was a lot of fun. So it was strange. I mean, it felt like I was sort of imprisoned in this very nice, very beautiful house, but at the same time, my imagination roamed, but it didn't roam any further than the house. So that was sort of the restriction I set to myself, like that. Who's that French writer who doesn't use the word letter E in one of his novels? So that was sort of my restriction, was maybe go 1 mile in this direction, 1 mile in that direction, and basta, no more.
That's really interesting. I bet there are a lot of people out there that wanted to write a book during the pandemic. So it's nice that you succeeded.
Well, thank you.
Probably I realized that early on.
Yeah, no, I realized that most of my time is spent, traveling around, doing readings and stuff. But I wrote this thing in like 7 months, which is bizarre for me. Like, it
Yeah,
usually takes 4 years. So viva pandemic for me in
right,
some ways. Yeah.
right. A lot of people accomplished a lot of things.
Yeah.
Ruth,
Yeah.
so of course, because I'm a librarian, I'm completely in love with the concept of the book as the primary, maybe not the primary narrative, but one of the primary narrators, sorry, not narrative, but narrators in the novel. Much of it's set in the library, as you said, which I love your idea of the library as being this quiet voiced, like orderly place, because if you work in a library, you feel very differently about it. It's like chaos all the time. And I also loved your description of some of the patrons and the staff at the library, because they feel so real, like those people
good.
actually exist.
I've
Anyway,
spent a lot of time in libraries.
you must have. If I were to guess, I would say you did. So what inspired you to write about this? I want to say, like, there's something lovely about the what you say about books and their sort of impact on us and the nature of storytelling and being human. So yeah, where did this all come from for you?
There's never one single inspiration for a book, especially a book, that's taken 10 years to write, or maybe it's 8 years this time. I'm very slow at this. But I think that in this case, there were several inspirations, but one of them certainly was, this book, I see it as a kind of almost like a cousin to A Tale for the Time Being. And that book, which also took about 8 or 10 years to write, went through many really radical changes during its inception. And in early iterations of that book, half of the book was set in a public library, and with sort of these characters who were denizens of the library. And then at some point, along the line, I ended up, for various reasons, having to sort of relocate that half of the book. And so the library was abandoned, right? And I felt really bad about that, because I liked it as a location. It was a wonderful location. And I'd done all of this, sort of research on old, on libraries and old binderies and various sort of aspects of libraries that we're that are currently changing and that we're losing. But even more than that, there were these characters who lived at the library, and one of them was this homeless Slovenian poet philosopher who's called the Bottle Man. Another one was this performance artist whose name is the Aleph. And then the librarians themselves. And what happened basically was that these characters, they organized. Librarians are very good at organizing, right? And so they organized, and they basically came back to me and said, we need a book of our own. And so that was really, I think, one of the main inspirations for this book was to figure out, some way to allow, to allow these characters and this location to, to continue in another form. And then the idea of a little boy who hears voices came to me. Well, I think it was probably in the aftermath of my own father's death. I had started having this experience where I would suddenly, just out of nowhere, I would hear him calling me. I'd hear him calling my name, and it was very disconcerting, because it really sounded like he was right there. And so I would turn around and look, and then it would occur to me, oh, he's dead, right? And so every time that happened, I would have a kind of resurgence of that feeling of grief and just missing him, And I have friends who are very involved in the Hearing Voices Network, and in sort of psychic diversity activism, social justice activism. And so I started to think more about this, and I started to research this as well. Very often, when I talk about writing, I talk about how characters come to me as voices. I hear the voice of the character speaking to me. And I remember there was one time when I was at a library actually giving a talk, and somebody in the audience raised his hand and asked me, what I meant by that. Did I literally hear the voice coming from outside, or was it something else? And so I sort of explained, the difference as I understood it then. And he then, clarified and said that the reason that he was asking was because his son was a voice hearer. And so he just was trying very hard to understand the relationship between the experience of voice hearing and the experience of creativity. And so I think it was, that sort of stuck in my mind as well. And so the book is a sort of an outgrowth of all of these concerns.
Wow, I'm so glad it all came together like that for you. I think maybe you're quite good at organizing.
I am.
Atticus, in your novel, Massachusetts, like Boston and the surrounding towns, are so incredibly rendered. I was actually quite surprised to hear that you didn't live there, or maybe you did at some point, but you said you were in Kentucky now. What went into making the decision about the setting, and how did you do it so well? And do you think it could have taken place anywhere else?
Well, I actually went to Massachusetts quite a lot. I took the bus, from New York, the Chinatown bus, and so I made a lot of trips. But to tell you the truth, I've actually spent a lot of time in Massachusetts, and my wife is from Massachusetts. That's where I met her, and so it kind of seemed natural to me because one of my characters is at MIT, and it'll fit together because he's, it just seemed like it had to be at MIT. But on the other hand, when you say, could it be anywhere else? Yeah, in a way it could be, because it's really just about what those people do with each other. It's not so much about Boston. So I agree with you. You probably could put it somewhere else. I do agree.
Interesting. Okay, well, those are the individual questions for you. And now comes the question that I wanted to ask you all. And I did warn them in advance, anyone who's watching, so they've had a little while to think about it. As librarians, a lot of times patrons will come in and they'll say, I'm looking for, my next great read. And one of the best ways that we can help them, connect them with something that they like, is to ask them about a book that they love. So I wanted to ask all of you, if you had to connect your book to another book, what would that book be? Does anyone want to jump in, or do you just not want to answer it? If you don't want to answer it, it's totally fine.
I'll answer. Answer.
Right.
Yeah. It's boy, that is such a tough question.
I was thinking actually, Ruth, for yours, when you were talking, you were like, you could probably connect it to A Tale for the Time Being.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah. Thank you for doing that, because it would sound terrible if I were, actually what I should say is like, oh, Lynn, that's a fantastic idea. You're right. Never thought about that. But actually that
makes sense, right?
But actually that's not the case. Yeah.
It's a little bit true for Elizabeth as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although, Elizabeth, when you were speaking, I was thinking about Alice Munro a little bit. And thinking that maybe I'm just reading into it. And I wouldn't say I would give your books to people who loved Alice Munro and vice versa. But there was something about the car trip.
Right.
There's like Alice Munro, it's all of these really awkward, like two people end up in a car together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
right. That's a great.
And not that your car trip was awkward, but the
no, but
car trip.
Right. There was one of her later ones where she's with a young woman in a car, and that's I can't remember the title of it, but it was very, very interesting.
That was the exact one too, and I can't remember the title of it either. But yeah,
I can't remember.
Yeah,
but it was a great story. So yeah, I'll take that.
Okay. Gary,
Thank
what
you.
about you? Do you have anything off the top of your head? Because I can do you too if you want. I've got one for you.
Oh yeah, well, now I'm curious as to what that would be.
I'll tell you what it is, actually, is
Okay.
Leave the World Behind. Did you read that?
Oh, no, I haven't. I should. I know people have been
It's
loving that
so
book.
good. It is so, so
Okay.
good. It was one of my
Okay.
favorites from last year. And it's funny too, because it is a dystopian.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've got to read that book. Everyone's
But
been
it-
raving about it. And yeah, that is a dystopian book.
but
Well, the
it's
one
also,
I was, I'm
but
sorry.
it's also really like the pandemic. But I think like the
Mhm.
imagery is amazing. I think you'll really enjoy it.
It's next on my list. Hey, this is why I love librarians. They give me
Right.
tracks. Thank you. The one I was actually thinking of was Ayad Akhtar's, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the Homeland Elegies. And what I
Ah,
love about that book, in the sense that this is kind of the stuff I write about, is that he's also one of these hot off the presses kind of writers that as the tragedy is going on, he's sort of writing about it, because the book it's about many things, but it's mostly about his father and his love of Trump. He has a Pakistani father, Pakistani American father, and unexpectedly the book is one of those auto fictions where you're not sure how much of it is true and how much of it is not. But I think he was a doctor who actually worked on some problem that Trump had. I could be completely wrong on that. A librarian can check. But I love that book, and I loved several things about it. One is, there's a lot of back and forth about this, about whether one should let things simmer or write about them as they're happening. And obviously I'm on the write about them as they're happening train. But I understand the other side of the argument as well, about, let's 5, 10, 15 years pass after a tragedy, and this is a tragedy, it's undoubtedly so. But Akhtar is working with the last couple of years in this country, pre-pandemic, because the book came out last year, but he's living with the Trump years and all of the detritus that ensued after that, and using a very personal lens, which is how I love to look at fiction. There's a giant background in the back, but you're only dealing with them through individual characters. And if the characters don't work, then all of it can be just thrown out. And the other part I like about Akhtar is that he also he explores immigrant parents, which has been my bread and butter for the last 20 years, having been born in the Soviet Union. And my book also has most of the people I grew up with. I went to a high school that was almost all immigrants in New York. So many of the friends I grew up with were Korean and Indian and all these other ethnicities that are also in this book. The focus on immigration was very important for me in that book as well.
that is a fantastic match. I would not have put those two together, but I really like that as a match. I loved that book too. It's so sort of tangential, and you're right. Like, you don't know whether you're reading like fiction or nonfiction, and you don't really care. And Elizabeth, there's this amazing road trip that he takes in it. So if you haven't read it, you would probably appreciate that. It's really great, that part of the book. I loved it.
Great road trip.
Yeah, nice job, nice match. You might have a career in librarianship.
Ooh, yes.
Atticus, what about you? Do you have a read alike for yours?
I'll tell you, a book that I read right before I started writing was People Who Eat Darkness.
I never read that. I know of it, but I haven't read it.
Man, I think that's really neat.
Yeah. I was thinking about a book for thinking about your book. I keep thinking about this Laird Hunt book that I love so much called Never Home. Have you read that? Have any of you read that? It's this wonderful book, and it's just got this thing about it. It's just got this incredible sense of setting. It's like set in the American West, and it's just this wonderful story. I think he's such a great writer. Okay, well done, all of you. The librarians are probably excited to see you do their work. We're getting close to the end, so I guess I should do my closing remarks, but I just want to thank you all. You've been so lovely to spend my morning with, and very nice. I must say, a little intimidated to be on this Zoom call, but it's been a real pleasure. So in closing, this brings us to the end of the session. I want to say thank you to each of our wonderful authors for spending this time with us today. Thank you for your books, past and current. We will always keep them on our shelves and recommend them to our patrons. Thank you to the attendees watching from Library Journal's Day of Dialogue. Please be sure to visit the Penguin Random House booth for more author-related content and collection development resources. And remember that this session, along with the others within Day of Dialogue, will remain archived for you for the next 3 months. Have a great day and happy reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very
Thanks so
much.
much, Lynn. Yeah.